Today is School National Walkout Day. After the tragedy in Parkland, Florida, a group of children, students, got together and decided enough was enough. And they wanted everyone to understand the importance of saying no to gun violence. So they made a coalition around the nation, and today, between 10 a.m. and 10:17 a.m., there was a walkout, and our students did an amazing job. So tonight we come just to give some information for our residents here in Bloomfield. We always think this will never happen here, but the way the world is today, we never know, so we can never say never. But here in Bloomfield, we do have some things in place. We do have some plans and some procedures in place, and tonight we're going to have a brief presentation of that. And we will start with our police department, Chief Hammock.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Mr. Schenk, members of the council, ladies and gentlemen. In many ways, I think I join all of you in wishing that tonight's meeting was unnecessary. Not because I don't enjoy spending time with all of you, but I wish we didn't have to think of the type of incident that we're going to spend time talking about this evening. For tonight's purposes, we're discussing response to mass shootings and active shooter incidents, and how the police department, town government, the Board of Ed, and other representatives in town are prepared to respond to an incident of this type. I've prepared some brief comments, and then I've asked Sergeant Fox to be with me, and I'll turn over the podium so that he can provide you with the latest information on how you should respond if you find yourself in a workplace, school, or social environment and an active shooter incident breaks out. It's a fact that there are more shootings in the United States than any other country in the world. If we define mass shootings as an incident in which a gunman shoots 4 or more people, and it happens in the same general time and location, then we experienced over 300 mass shootings in 2017. According to the Gun Violence Archive, which compiles data from mass shootings, we average 7 mass shootings per week in the United States. Now that includes all mass shootings. Now let's say we remove all the incidents which involve the victim and the offender who knew one another, or incidents in which the victims were only wounded. By those stats, we still have 1 mass shooting every month. We know that the majority of mass shootings occur at businesses and at schools. Combined, they account for over 70% of all mass shootings in the United States. The remainder occur at various locations and settings, including church settings, government buildings, and social events. My point being that we have to be aware that a mass shooting can, and the possibility exists that it could happen anywhere. Now, to bring us back to home, to our community in Bloomfield, the Bloomfield police officers are trained and prepared to respond to a variety of critical incidents that could happen within our community. It's not unusual for officers to deal with violent offenders, career criminals, and emotionally disturbed people on a weekly or daily basis. While we've not responded to mass shootings or typical active shooter incidents, it is still very important that the police department train, learn, and retrain in the modern techniques to address the many situations that we're confronted with. An active shooter is defined as someone who is actively engaged in shooting, assaulting, and or threatening potential victims with deadly force. During such an event, every second counts. Officers from the Bloomfield Police Department are trained to respond and arrive at an active shooting incident and make every effort to intervene without delay. In most situations, an effective response to an active shooter situation requires that officers form in a contact team to stop that active shooter. However, while it's advantageous to always respond and act tactically, sometimes it's necessary that officers go in alone. Officers are supplied with equipment consisting of ballistic body armor, and on-duty patrol officers are also equipped additionally with patrol rifles and shotguns. The responding officer's primary mission when they respond to an active shooter incident is to locate, isolate, and stop the active shooter. This means that they could initially bypass victims in the case. Once they address and contain the threat, then we send in rescue teams consisting of multiple officers who will be sent into the scene to locate, rescue victims, and coordinate the evacuation of all the people from the building. All officers responding to an active shooter will be easily identifiable as police officers. Typically, they'll either be in the uniform of the day, which John and I are wearing, or they'll be in a vest with clearly marked police on the front and back so that there'll be no mistaking it. Once an active shooter is stopped, the victims are removed for treatment. Officers will then switch to an investigative role where we'll take the next necessary steps to make sure that we're preserving evidence so we can determine what happened, who did it, and all the necessary things to resolve the situation from an investigative standpoint. Bloomfield police officers are supplied with building layouts of all Bloomfield and Creek schools within our community. Also, during the initial field training program, all new officers are familiarized with the schools and their layouts as part of their ongoing part of their initial training. Officers are also familiarized with many of our corporate buildings, such as Cigna and others in the community, so that they know what they're going into should the worst case happen. And most importantly, officers are regularly briefed at roll call and roll call trainings about the latest tactical techniques and procedures in relation to critical incidents. Often the shift supervisor will review responses, such as what happened recently in Florida, and other incidents throughout the nation, so that we can learn from them. We can talk to the officers about what their responsibilities are, what they would do in a situation in which they were confronted with an active shooter, so that we can think of the various incidents that could happen. They're not all cookie cutter. So you try and analyze what other departments did. I'll go through some of the literature and pass that down to the officers so that they can see what the modern techniques are. 10, 15 years ago, I hate to say when I was on the street, but it's what it was. The response was from police departments that you responded to an incident and we contained it and we held on until we got tactical resources to come in. Those are officers who spent more time training in how to respond to situations like this. But what we've seen is that the damage from an active shooter happens in the first few minutes. And you don't have time in these incidents to take all the precautions that we would like to. Police officers are sworn to protect and defend the community. So we have adjusted to this type of incident, and now we make it a priority to respond and then take action immediately so that you can address that threat, if you will. So at this time, I'd like to invite Sergeant Fox up. John Fox is one of the senior members of our tactical team. He's a senior supervisor at my department. He's also one of the liaisons with the school system, with the community in Bloomfield. And I'd like him to talk to you about the modern techniques and what Homeland Security is distributing as talking points on how to respond as a civilian or a layperson in the event you're confronted with an incident like this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good evening. I've spoken with many of you over the last few years, several of you about this topic specifically, and like we do internally, it's good to go over this material time and time again, especially when we have recurring incidents such as the Parkland, Florida shooting. As an industry, law enforcement learns from every incident, right? So we experience some tragedy, and then we learn from our mistakes or from our successes. It's very important to evaluate the incident actions that were taken on scene or afterwards, and be transparent with our community, share the information that is going to be helpful to you folks, and then, of course, scrutinize and develop protocols that are going to be best for us as law enforcement responders. We use Department of Homeland Security's directive or recommendations for active shooter response, which is coined run, hide, fight. Any of the educators in the room are aware of it. Anybody that may have been at one of the church presentations in town heard us talk about it. Run, hide, fight is a development on I guess at this point it's an archaic concept of a lockdown, right? So a simple lockdown, you're hoping that the violence doesn't come to you. You're hoping that you can hide under a desk or in an office, and that the threat will bypass you and go somewhere else. We learned, as the chief said, in 1999 Columbine shooting, that one, law enforcement response was inadequate. It wasn't keeping kids safe. And two, educators weren't keeping their kids safe or their staff safe by strictly locking down. And you had trend breakers, even at Columbine, that chose to not just lock down and hide, chose to evacuate rooms, which was against their current protocol, and saved dozens or hundreds of lives. So what we learned from Columbine first in 1999 is that we have to respond as law enforcement officers. We have to go in. It's, like the chief said, we're sworn to protect and serve. We have training, we have equipment, and we don't have time, right? So these incidents are historically over within 15 minutes, right? And most of them, the average is around 3 minutes. It's only that long because of some of the more prolonged incidents. Columbine was a very long incident, and it changes the average duration of these incidents. So you have moments really to act. When we get to a scene, we're trying to express or teach our officers, many of them are new, what we would expect to see from our community, from our schools, from our churches, from our businesses. Run, hide, fight is something that empowers our staff, our students, and anybody who visits our town, works in our town, to make the best decision for them and the people around them, right? So instead of saying you have to follow a very hard and strict policy, you're now being encouraged to make a split-second decision or an informed decision. What is going to be the best option for you and the people around you to mitigate as much threat or risk as possible. So your run option is the biggest development. If you have violence that's happening in a south wing and you're in a north wing, there's no reason why you should stay in the environment, right? So from a law enforcement perspective, that's considered a hot zone anywhere on the premise. And then depending on where you are in law enforcement, that could be considered a warm zone. So that's something that's close to the violence, but it's not in direct harm. Those folks are going to be expected to make a decision to run, to evacuate. And it's safe if they're not putting themselves closer to the harm, right? The other option is to hide. If you don't have a safe point of egress, and you have the ability to barricade your room, barricade your office, to hide your kids or your staff, that winds up being the safest option for you rather than exposing you further to threat. The last option is your fight option. Everybody instinctually has that in them, right? It's a primal response, so you're either going to fight or flee. And we're trying to tell people it's okay. It's okay to protect yourselves. It's okay to protect your kids. We experienced it in Newtown. We experienced it in Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech was another significant learning point for both law enforcement and I guess government and education. They failed to share information early on in the incident. There was initially a double homicide on campus. The information wasn't disseminated. People weren't allowed to make a decision whether to stay on campus or leave until they found the gunman. As a result, 30-ish people were murdered, and they paid out, it was close to $50 million in lawsuits. Now that's not just a drop in the bucket compared to the loss of life, but in that incident you had teachers and staff who stood up and protected their kids, and several of them lost their lives doing it. But it was an action of fighting back, and it was a last resort effort. The gentleman was blocking a door and fighting with the shooter, and it allowed the rest of the classroom to leave through a window, through a safe point of egress. This wasn't something that was ever taught, right? This wasn't something that was taught in your lockdowns 20 years ago, 15 years ago. This is a 2007 incident. But so this is where we wind up getting the tools that should help us make good decisions. So for the educators in the room, and you run your fire drills, if you've ever blocked your primary exit and then asked your staff to make the best decision to go out a secondary exit or a tertiary exit, in the police department we have 3 points of egress. We have 3 areas to meet up as part of our typical emergency action plan, so our evacuation plan. Churches should have that. We've spoken to several people in several churches in town. Businesses are supposed to have that. You know, if you have an emergency action plan, you're given the opportunity to make a decision, the best decision to keep you and your staff safe. What we ask, and what Department of Homeland Security asked through their publishing, they're asking everybody to remain calm. So probably not likely that there's some active violence happening in your environment and you could remain calm. But remain calm, put your hands down, put your hands up, don't have anything in your hands, don't walk around with a cell phone in your hand. Keep everything visible, run to the safest point of egress. Avoid quick movements towards officers. It also tells us to avoid pointing, screaming, yelling, or asking officers for help. So in reality, we don't expect many of these things to be followed, right, as responding officers, but understanding the fact that our officers are being told, whether you have 4 people with you or you're there alone, that your first and only objective is to isolate and neutralize whatever harm could ensue, right? So they're not going to stop and give you directions. They're not going to stop and tell you where you should meet up. They're not going to stop and care for your wounds until the violence has stopped, right? One of the most significant things that we're telling our officers is that we have to rehearse mentally. So you mentally prepare. You think about how you're going to respond. There's a lot of talk, and we haven't received official briefings yet. It takes quite a while from Parkland, but there's a lot of media talk about how officers responded, and there's a lot of assumptions as to why that was the response. It could be that somebody didn't know what to do and they froze. It could be that somebody was afraid to act. But we don't know without having been there, without having the official information that's available or will be available in the future. One of the ways that we prevent that is by drilling and repetition and mentally preparing. And the athlete will prepare and rehearse mentally every single day, probably dozens or hundreds of times. Our officers do the same thing. And our training is repetitive, and it's clean. It's the best practices. We talked about it every single roll call, really, since the incident. But this is something that hasn't been stowed away for years. We bring this up every several weeks or months, and we talk about response to incidents. What I encourage our community to do is to have a plan in place, to talk about it with your staff, talk about it with your kids, invite us in. We're more than happy to come in and speak with both your staff and your students, or your employees, your congregation. But you have to have some plan. You have to have thought about what are the safest options. And if you can't identify safe options, there's something wrong with your facility, or you need some guidance, then that's a good opportunity for you to reach out for help, either from other similar institutions or to your local law enforcement. So unless there's anything else, that's what we're teaching our community coming down from the Department of Homeland Security. All right, thank you.
Thank you. On today, there were in remembrance of the students that were taken, also protesting and bringing awareness to gun laws that needs to be changed. there were some activities that happened around our town in our different schools. So I do believe that we have someone from the Board of Ed that's going to talk to us about that.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Our Mayor and our Town Council, thank you for this opportunity to share what our students and our community has done so thoughtfully. In response to the widely communicated walkout, our committee of... Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, my name is Bethany Silver, Dr. Silver. I am the Assistant Superintendent of Accountability and Performance for the Bloomfield Public Schools. Thank you. So in response to that widely communicated walkout, our Committee of Teachers of the Year came together, and with our administration, we planned events that would honor the Parkland community and honor our students as well. So our goal was for Bloomfield to come together as a school community to show support for Marjorie Stone Douglas High School and all schools affected by school violence, and to help our students feel empowered and supported through solidarity with our school community. So our 7 schools participated in an event called Standing Together for Kindness. And this was a proactive way of harnessing our students and teachers' concerns and providing positive activities for our community. Each Teacher of the Year and their school leadership team developed an age-appropriate plan for our students and that community to take place for 17 minutes today. I just want to share with you what happened at each of our schools. So at Bloomfield High School, the activity focused on remembering the lives lost in the Florida high school tragedy. Pictures were shared of the 17 individuals, and a person at the high school gave the name of each person, their age, their role in the school, and then a person made 2 to 3 I statements reinforcing the idea that we are all connected. At our Global Experience Magnet School, they chose to participate in a day of kindness by having activities focused on 17 acts of kindness within the school, and then conducting a kindness walk around the outside of the building for 17 minutes and observing 17 minutes of silence. At Carmen A. Race Intermediate School, each class contributed a line to a poem about kindness, met in the auditorium and shared those lines, sang together "Where is the Love" by the Black Eyed Peas. At Metacomet Elementary School, we held a school-wide assembly to share kindness posters made by each class and sang "We Are the World" by Quincy Jones, Michael Jackson, and many other artists. At Laurel Elementary, Shannon Buzzle, our Teacher of the Year there, printed a kindness pledge that students read aloud. And I had the honor of being actually at Laurel School and hearing all of those young voices read that pledge. It was really beautiful. They created flowers that talked about words and acts of kindness, and those are on a bulletin board. It's really a lovely little meadow that they've made there on the wall. And did an activity together, shaking each other's hands, high-fiving each other, and in a wonderful community way. At Wintonberry, the classrooms decorated their large window at the rear of the classroom in the spirit of positivity and kindness. And then also each classroom had a blank yard sign to decorate with a peaceful, happy message. And then the students conducted a walk around the outside of the building to look at the posters that had been created within the classrooms. The posters were really beautiful. It's so exciting to see what children in our early learning school, in pre-K and first grade, the quality of what they produced, it was really, really special. And so we did we conducted these acts of kindness with our communities to honor the situation that happened in Florida. Okay.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
We also have representatives here from Metropolitan Learning Center. I'm going to ask you to talk about what you did today, but I'm also going to ask you to talk about what you do on a daily basis to make sure that our children are safe.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. My name is Al Collins. I'm a student coordinator at the Metropolitan Learning Center. Today at approximately 10 a.m., I'm going to say about 95% of our students staged a walkout where they walked and proceeded around the building approximately 2 times for 17 minutes. It was fantastic for the staff to stand around and watch our students as they prepared numerous signs showing solidarity to what happened in Florida. They did it pretty much in silence. We kind of forgot how cold it was just watching the students as they made their way around the building. It was quite touching. At MLC, what we do on a daily basis, we work very closely with Bloomfield Police Department. We have a safety committee that we meet quarterly and go over different procedures as procedures change constantly. We have a extensive camera system in the building that is monitored pretty much all day. There's a set in our main security office. Our assistant principal has a set in his office, and I monitor from my office also. So we have eyes on approximately 45 to 50 cameras throughout our building. Things change rapidly. We're trying to keep up with different things as it goes on. Right now, we're planning a subcommittee that's going to be working on a new procedure that pretty much, I believe, is called ALICE program, where you fight and get out. We used to lock down and get in corners. Now, if you can get out, get out. We think about this constantly. This is something that we run through our heads, not only when things happen, we're constantly thinking about the safety of the children in our building. For 7.5 hours a day, they are our responsibility. So our main priority is to make sure that each one of our 745 students get home at 3 o'clock. So again, with the support of Bloomfield Police Department, we've made this happen. And we appreciate being invited here today. We hope this isn't our last time.
Thank you. We do have the truancy officer here from Bloomfield as well, so I'm going to ask her to come up.
What officer?
Truancy.
At the high school.
Good evening. I'm Cindy Fisher. My official title is Lead Security and Residency Officer. And so I oversee the security in the district and make sure that we meet all the state mandates. And doing our emergency plans, I coordinate the lockdown drills, and we do it in association with the police. Police are present during our lockdown drills, and I try to have them set up so that it'll be as close to real as it can be for the first few seconds. Staff members are not made aware when we're going to do a lockdown drill. All staff members are empowered to make the 911 call if they have information or knowledge of what's going on. And our initial thing, we follow the protocol, but we've really talked about how fast, how quietly we can get ourselves covered, and how fast we get those 911 calls in. Because and we're very fortunate for the location of most of our buildings, it'll be a very quick response, and that's what I'm counting on.
Thank you. I see hands going up, so I'm going to go to Councilor Mann and then Councilor McCleary.
Hi, I just have a question. How often do you do the lockdown drills, and are they always combined with a police connection at that point, or just the high school doing their lockdown drills and separately, or how does that work?
By state law, each school is mandated to do 3 per year. And it's also mandated that a police officer evaluates them, and it's twofold. We get police officers into the building and getting more familiar. And also the idea of the staff and students becoming aware that when there is a lockdown or any emergency situation, they have to be ready to follow the directions of the police officers. They're the ones that will be releasing them and giving the directions of what they need to do.
Thank you.
Councilman McCleary?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm happy you brought up this state law, because I read a couple of weeks ago about in the Hartford Current that over 100 school districts were in violation of not submitting its school security safety plan. We wasn't a part of that 100 school district, right? And then 60 in the last 2 years, right? And then a second portion of that report showed that most school districts post-Sandy Hook was not submitting when they did their fire drills, when they did their lockdowns, and they were supposed to submit it to the Department of Environmental, DEEP, I think it is. You're supposed to submit it to them. Are we following state law?
We are. From the very first get-go, in the changeover and meeting the new outline that the state wants us to follow from the study, we have been in compliance from the very first year. So we have done it for 3 years now.
One more question. I know,
And as far as the reporting of the fire alarms and the lockdowns, I do the lockdown report, pass it on to Mr. Guzman, who adds it to the fire report, and it's filed with the state before July 1st.
good. Another question. So in that gun safety bill, there was some school security money. Have we taken advantage of those funds that the state has offered post-Sandy Hook to upgrade, to monitor and make sure that our schools are safe, particularly tinted windows, bulletproof glass? Have we upgraded cameras, PA systems? Have we taken advantage of that? Or do we have plans to take advantage of those funds?
The grant was actually applied to before I became overseeing security, and it was under Wayne Casper, and he did multiple different things in the buildings, added the bollards outside and different things like that. We have camera systems in every single building, and they're monitored in various locations. Principals even have access that they can monitor them on their iPads and stuff when they're out of the buildings if they want to. And currently, there are not any available because Mr. Jostling did a check because we were going to try to take advantage of any more money to improve camera systems where we could.
Other questions?
Let the deputy mayor go first, and then you again.
Hi. Thanks for being here. I have a quick question. Most of the schools, well, all the schools, in order to gain entry into the building, you need to be buzzed in. In an event of there's an active shooter, what occurs at that point? Is that door shut? When the officers arrive on the scene, how do they get into the building?
All the doors are locked.
Okay.
There is boxes at each building for the fire personnel to get in, and supervisors should have exterior door keys in the cruiser.
In the cruiser?
Yeah.
Okay.
But should I give a secret away?
No, I don't need that secret. No, I just want to. I don't need the secret away. I just need to know that.
Believe me, the police are not going to hesitate. They will get in by any means necessary.
I know you said we do 3 per year training with, because I know my daughter comes home and she tells me about it all the time. I think we need to do more than 3. In addition to that, is it in coordination with the officers? Because I think as more you get the kids familiarized with having the officers around in an event of something that's happening, it's easier for kids to be comfortable in seeing officers with weapons out. And so, do we do those type of training?
Yes, it's mandated by the state that it's evaluated by an officer. So every time I do it, I'm doing it with police officers. And they're the ones that are actually going through, clearing the rooms and opening the doors for the children. Because that's what it would be like in a real situation.
No, I guess the point I'm trying to make is, do the officers come in with full gears, with weapons out? I mean,
No, they go in their full uniform.
okay. I'm just saying, it's good to get the kids familiarized with a weapon being drawn or out, per se, in case of an event. Because as you saw in Florida, kids are coming out, they're scared, they're seeing guns out. I mean, it's just a different world we're in, so it's just getting those kids,
I'll let them address it, but tactically, I don't know that we would be.
We work in cooperation with the school board and school, in high school, middle school, and elementary schools.
Chief?
When?
Chief, you mind? Yeah.
They're hearing your voice, but they're not seeing it.
We do work in coordination with the Board of Ed and with the schools on their drills. Typically, when our manpower levels are at adequate levels, we have a school resource officer in both the high school and the middle school, Bloomfield Public Schools. When we conduct the drills, we do not have the officers with their weapons drawn. That is a safety precaution. But the presence is there. I think I'd be very cautious before I sent officers in with weapons drawn in that type of situation, just from a safety perspective.
Well, the only reason I brought it up, obviously what happened in Florida, officers got on the scene based on reports and didn't enter because they froze. I mean, I don't have all the details. Obviously, that to me is could be perceived as lack of training or in an intense environment. So what are we doing at Bloomfield to make sure our officers are ready?
Well, as we said earlier, we train. We try to learn from each incident. I have confidence that the men and women on my staff would take immediate action. As I said in a meeting just earlier this week, we often train to our least common denominator to make sure, even if it's an officer in the building who might be getting in his or her car, going to get a coffee or lunch, that they have the equipment in their car that's necessary to conduct a response should they be in that situation. The last thing I want is an officer to not have the necessary safety equipment or tactical equipment to respond when they need to. And in my experience, the worst things often happen when we're the least prepared. So you try and prepare yourself for those events. But all we can do is prepare. And then make sure we're in the best possible, that we've prepared ourselves best to respond should that happen.
Councilman McCary? Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't know if this is for the police department or the truancy officer for the Board of Ed, but there was an incident that I saw on social media about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, where the BHS was confused with the school in Mexico. What is the communication system and how are we educating parents, about potential threats and, when it's resolved? Because I think there was a lot of miscommunication and a lot of parents were getting a little nervous on social media and, complaining about, we wasn't notified, we were notified at the last minute. So is there some type of communication system? Because also at Parkland, when parents found out that there was an active shooter, a whole bunch of parents started to go to the scene of the incident, to the school. Is there some type of communication, again, plan where, parents are directed not to come to the school, meet at the local firehouse or something? What is the procedure and how are we educating parents?
There's a lot of questions there. I'll answer the first part of the question, and I'll turn it over to Cindy for the latter part. First part of the question, I think we got that call early morning hours. The supervisor on duty and officers on duty responded to it immediately, chased down the leads, and then to ensure that the threat was not germane to Bloomfield. Once we made that determination and daylight hours came, we passed that information on as quickly as possible. As far as communication, I'll turn that over to Cindy.
I received a call at 12:45 a.m. from Chief of Operations saying that incident occurred. I called the Bloomfield Police Department, talked to the shift supervisor, called Mr. Guzman back, relayed the information that it was an incident in New Mexico and arrest had already been done. And then I got a call from Stan Simpson so that he handles the communication part. And then I believe, I was out the following day, but I believe there was different notifications made and there was extra attention at the schools provided by the police department.
So I'm going to take liberty to ask Mr. Collins to come up because there was a situation that happened at MLC where there could have been an issue with the student and social media, and parents are wondering if they should send their children. It's really interesting, Mr. Collins, because I want you to talk about that.
The one thing is, for the Bloomfield Public Schools, we can do a robocall, just like we do for the snow calls and that sort of thing. So that's a main communication first line going out to parents.
So after Mr. Collins talks about what happened at MLC, I'm hoping that either the sergeant or the chief can talk about what actually happened at Bloomfield High. Because it was a couple of days afterwards, there was some incident at Bloomfield High where someone made a threat or they thought there was a threat. There was police presence at the school because something went out on social media the week right after, well actually it happened the week before MLC's event happened. And how do I know? I'm a mom, so I get the phone calls and the emails and the kids and the social media and all that stuff. So I'm going to have Mr. Collins go.
Yes, Madam Mayor, you put me on the spot. Yes, we did have an incident at MLC where a middle school student did make a threat. It was a threat made that was serious, that he seriously regretted soon after he made it, realized it was a terrible mistake. We took the proper precautions, notified Bloomfield Police Department. We take every threat serious. Parents were notified. It was handled as quickly as we possibly could.
Thank you.
All right.
Everybody loves stepping away from the mic and pushing me back in front of it. I have to somewhat veil some of my comments only because I'm restricted by statute on the identities of juveniles, etc. I can tell you that we did have a threat at one of the schools in Bloomfield. We investigated that immediately. We took it very seriously. And I believe we resolved that issue before the date that was mentioned. However, out of an abundance of caution, I sent officers to the school just to make sure, for two reasons. A, to make sure that, be doubly protective, make sure nothing happened, and B, or second, to let the school board officials know, the teachers and the students, that we were taking it seriously and we were there for their protection. One of the things that I have enjoyed for the 7 years that I've been chief in Bloomfield is a very strong level of communication between the police department and the school board and all of the schools. Not just at my level, but I think that permeates down through the police department from the school resource officers, Officer Wilkins, our community service officer, Sergeant Fox, who's in communication with various representatives from the school board and from the school officials on a daily basis. And that constant communication is really a good source of information sharing and a comfort to make sure that we're all doing our best to protect students in town.
Thank you.
I have a question for the Chief.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah. Chief, how many resource officers do we have here in Bloomfield?
Typically, we have two assignments. We have a school resource officer at Carmen Race and a school resource officer at Bloomfield High School. We also have a community officer, Officer Robert Wilkins, who floats among the various schools and responds to any needs, and then we take other requests on a case-by-case basis, but certainly prioritize those very highly.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Councilor McCleary?
Are we doing any police cruises outside of the schools in the morning as kids are entering the schools? I know after the Parkland situation, they had police officers outside the schools to make sure that students are safe. I know we talked about, some officers are out on, leave, and, you have to pull the school resource officers. Is it possible for us to kind of put an officer cruiser outside of the school during the morning and in the afternoon to kind of deter anybody who may, I know we're a safe community, small community, and we hope that it doesn't happen, but could we put some cruisers outside of the schools in the morning just to ensure that anybody who's thinking or may think about doing it?
So with all of the things, we typically act and respond in a reasonable fashion. So if there's any type of threat, if there's any type of intelligence that we're getting that there is a threat to any of the schools, whether it be Bloomfield schools or the correct schools in town, we send resources over there to make sure we communicate with them, to make sure they're aware of the information we have. And we also get that reciprocal information from the schools when we're not made aware of it, and typically that's what happens. The schools are made aware of the threat far before we are. We'll dedicate any resources that they request of us or that we think are necessary to make sure that everyone is safe. After that, it's really case-by-case basis, right? If there are dates or anniversaries that are particularly that are well known, we'll send officers to make sure they have a presence there. For instance, today we had officers at every single school. Based on the number of schools and the number of police officers on shift, it could spread you a little bit thin, but we try to make that accommodation at all times. And then when our staffing levels are up, we maintain the school resource officers at all times. It's the last position that I pulled back into the patrol division, not only into the technicalities of staffing, but it's the last position that we pull back in order to boost our patrol ranks before any other position in the building, because those school resource officer positions have been emphasized by previous councils, by the school board, and by members of the community as important to them, and I understand that.
Councilor Mann?
Probably the toughest question to ask surrounds the controversial solution of arming teachers. That's being discussed all over the country, I suppose, since it's out there. I'd like to ask you, and perhaps someone from the Board of Ed, if this is an issue in our town, a consideration, just so that parents, and we all know what we may be up against.
That says the man that doesn't have kids.
Thankfully, it's an issue that legislators have to decide on, not myself. I'm not an advocate. I'm not a supporter of arming teachers. I think teachers have a role, and police officers have a role. Security personnel have a role. I've dealt with violence for 28 years. And I just don't think that teachers should be worrying about carrying a gun in school. They should be focused on teaching and mentoring kids, and we should be doing our best to make sure that they're safe when they do that.
Thank you.
Good evening. Bill Jocelyn, Human Resources, Bloomfield Public Schools. That's an interesting question. It's one that we've thought an awful lot about ourselves. I would concur with the chief. I mean, we've all, in my 39 years, safety meant, when I started teaching, that we would do our fire drills, that we would do our bad weather drills, that it never occurred to us that we would ever be locking doors. It's a different world. Even the thought of back in 1979, when I came into teaching, that we'd even be talking about arming teachers would have been something that I couldn't even imagine. So certainly take our direction from the school board, but we are not, from my discussions with union leadership and so on and so forth, it's not an area that we're looking into.
Very good to know. Councilor McClary?
Thank you. We talk about, teachers carrying guns and the police and what we're doing for, the safety, but I worry about mental health. Do we have enough social workers to kind of help students through their personal issues in the schools, whether it's bullying or whether it's, some type of mental illness? Do we have adequate social workers?
That's an excellent question, because it really is, we're about education. And we also know that kids come from all walks of life. They all have specific strengths and weaknesses. We have a very innovative program in Bloomfield Public Schools, because it was recognized a couple of years ago now that what's important are boots on the ground. We need people to talk to kids. A single social worker in each of the schools. A lot of schools don't have that, even one. What we did was we got together with universities in the area with aspiring social workers to come and do internships under our social workers. So what that's enabled us to do is multiply the number of adults that can sit and work with children, present to classrooms. They were all very present today in our discussions. So we're very lucky in Bloomfield to have those relationships. Our students are very lucky to have many adults to talk to, not only social workers, but many mentors. We have people from the community that come in. We never know who a kid's going to open up to, and we learn from them. Discussions are important, and I was thinking while I was sitting there how lucky we are to have the relationship with the Bloomfield Police Department for that end of it. But our teachers are all boots on the ground as well, and after every lockdown procedure, and I'm in agreement with Councilman Curtin that 3 lockdowns doesn't sound like a lot, but the data that we collect from each and every lockdown, we assess. And we talk about what went well, what didn't go well. And that's all the teachers, along with the help with the police and along with the help from our school resource safety officers, that what did we do well, what can we do better next time? Every time there's an incident, we too look at the current event. What happened there? Are we prepared to deal with that particular situation? So it's many people looking at it, many people paying attention, many people listening, and then having opportunities for interventions, which we are very blessed to have in Bloomfield.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Councilman Goff. Almost missed it.
This has been a very fascinating discussion in hearing this, and I just want to go back to one of the comments you made about you would never, when you start teaching, believe we lock down the school, or, we lock the doors of the school. You weren't even talking about lockdowns. You were talking about just getting into the schools. Right. I guess one of the things I'm concerned with the entire debate and the entire direction we go is, what is this psychological effect on our young people with a lack of agency? Yeah. Because, it's great there's social workers in the building, but really what we should be having is the free flow of people and ideas. And I think that there's something ultimately very, very problematic about young people being treated in some way like we treat prisoners. And I know there's no intention for that. Right. That is not meant as an intentionality. I'm just drawing the metaphor because we have gotten to the point where we're talking about locking the doors. You have to be buzzed in. We were here a couple of weeks ago when we were talking to a lot of parents, and I guess there is a policy that parents have to notify the schools before they can come in and see the teachers or whatever. I'm concerned on the other end that the pendulum swings too far under the rubric of safety. Yeah. And make no mistake, everyone wants all of the kids and all of the people in our congregations and in our workplaces to be safe. But eventually, what kind of damage do you do in going the other direction?
I'm picking up on two things you're saying, and I think they're both very important points. One of the things we struggle with is that balance between a welcoming environment, because we want the community in our schools. We want community to come in and see what we're doing. We want parents, because studies show that involved parents lead to successful students. But yet, we also have this struggle where we have to protect, and we have to be sure that we're protecting students on a regular basis. So we have those discussions often. How much is too much? How much is not enough? I can remember when we first put locks on doors and intercoms, it was very controversial, but we felt we had to do it. I can remember walking through my hallway as a principal and seeing complete strangers in my school. And I would certainly stop them and ask them why they were there, but the door was wide open to anybody. We would have people coming in using the restrooms. Times have changed. The other thing you picked up on is something we all are concerned about, and again, it's a byproduct of the world we live in. Every time this happens, we're watching out for kids. We get a current event with what happened in Florida. We immediately have our school psychologists, our social workers, our teachers, our principals, they all gather to say, how are we going to address this with kids? Because they watch the news. They come in, they're frightened. How do we deal with that? How do we help parents deal with it? Because not all of them know what to do either. We're all learning from this. So finding that balance between nurturing kids, having them feel safe and protected, but at the same time, the real world is we got to talk about this stuff. So we struggle with that too, and we're all still learning.
And do you, in having those discussions, do you involve the community? Are those basically internal discussions between school personnel, school psychologists, and so forth? Or do you reach out to the community, get parents' input, and try to find out what might, what their concerns are, and what might be a good fit between them?
Yeah, I think that happens at the building level. I think our principals, our social workers are in good communication with the community and parents. We certainly are looking for we reach out to the police department. They help, they assist us. We have an excellent relationship with our health department when we have those kinds of scares, and do a lot of discussion depending upon the situation. We do reach out to our experts in the community.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But I just want to just piggyback on what Councilman Goff just said. And as a parent of two kids within the school, I've never been through any sit-down program where other parents are coming into the schools and talking about, active shooters or from that standpoint. So I don't think there's anything in place, or either that or I missed it. But
I don't know what activities the PTOs have employed in the district, and not.
I don't think PTOs has done anything in regards to an active shooter. Based on my 5 or 7 years within the school system, I haven't seen anything of the sort.
I know that you want to say something, so before the counselors keep on, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Again, Bethany Silver, Assistant Superintendent. So this Saturday, we do have an event planned for our community. It's our first Bloomfield Public Schools STEAM Day. STEAM is S-T-E-A-M, that's Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and
mathematics.
Awesome. That's great, and I hope that you'll be there. And so
What time is it?
that begins at 9 a.m. with a breakfast.
And where?
It's at Bloomfield High School. And what we have is, we're very excited about this. Scott Driscoll, who's a nationally known speaker, he's a former FBI agent and a former police officer. He is coming to talk to our parents about internet safety. So it's different than an actual discussion about violence within the school, but it is about internet safety and the information our parents need in order to protect our children. So that, actually, the breakfast is at 9:45, 10 o'clock, Mr. Driscoll will speak from 10 to 11:30. And while he's speaking, we have invited our parents to register ahead of time, and they registered ahead of time. We have children coming, and they will be engaged in STEAM activities. We have a number of classrooms that have been set aside and a number of different activities, again, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. So while the parents are learning about how to protect our children from the dangers of the internet, from Mr. Driscoll, who is an investigator, has done he did come to A-Race last Friday and speak to our students in 5th through 9th grade. We brought students from our other schools too, to talk to them about how to use the internet with wisdom and be thoughtful about what they're doing. He will also be speaking to our parents on Saturday. And I did want to share with you our bands. In honor of Parkland, we have the school colors, which are the burgundy and white, and our teachers had bands made, and I have some with me to share with our council members so that you can stand together with us in kindness.
It is. I think it's acceptable. Thank you very much. I didn't want to leave out our town buildings, because you never know what'll happen in our town buildings or at a council meeting, so I want to make sure that we're safe.
Well, Mayor, on behalf of the town employees and whatnot, I'm happy to give you an overview both externally to the town buildings and internally. As the police chief has indicated, we have an active shooter briefing that we have presented to numerous groups, including the Chamber of Commerce, the Bloomfield Center Business Alliance, the Interfaith Council, and others. And I would urge anybody out there, if you're working in an office environment or a retail environment, even a warehouse environment, check with your management staff there to find out exactly what your security program is. And our police department is always available to go out and offer that program to any business in the community. In terms of internal things, the town of Bloomfield itself has a safety committee. We also have a security committee. And the security committee has set up plans, operations plans and response plans for not only active shooter types of events, but also fires and medical emergencies. We have trained individuals on each floor to deal with those. We have periodic drills. The town buildings are equipped with cameras, alarms, and other security devices, which I won't go into detail on, but we have those available. So I think the residents can feel comfortable coming to Town Hall, the library, other town buildings, 330 Park Avenue, our Human Services facility, where we do have security, as I said, procedures and devices, cameras and so forth that are in place, that are monitored and provide a safe and relatively secure environment for everybody. Okay?
Thank you. Any questions out there? Yes, ma'am, please come on up.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Town Council. My name is Patricia Davis, and I reside at 4 Lisa Lane. I am also a parent of an 11th grader at Bloomfield High School, as well as I sit on the Board of Education. I'd just like to thank the officers, in particular, Sergeant Fox has come to the school and given a presentation over the years on behalf of the Bloomfield High School PTO, and we really do appreciate the partnership that we've developed over the years. As a parent, and with the incidents that have happened, I'd just like to address the situation because, in particular with the Bloomfield High School, Because I've had such an active role, my oldest graduated in 2011. I was on the PTO when he was at J.P. Vincent in kindergarten, and he graduated in 2011. I now have a junior. I have always remained active. I think my position on the board was because of my advocacy for parents. So with that being said, I have an investment in this town. I'm invested, and I have a lot of parents who depend on me. A lot of parents who come to me and share their concerns. Now with my position on the board, I've had to recluse myself from a lot of different things, but for this particular incident, I just need to share that parents came to me because they were really concerned, because they were nervous. When the information came out about Bloomfield High School and all that was going on, that information was not relayed to us in an appropriate manner for the parents and the kids. The kids were petrified. After the first initial event, I went up to that high school personally, because the night when the BHS Instagram post came out, I was called at 11:30 by a parent saying, "Ms. Davis, what is going on?" I'm like, what is going on? My son got an Instagram post, and we're calling the police officer. The police officer came to their house immediately. They called me back and said the officer had investigated and that they found out it was a school in Mexico and that we had really no issues or anything to be worried about. The next morning, I personally went to the high school with my son, and there were police officers present. We had Mr. Guzman from the Board of Ed there, as well as the principals, the assistant principals, and one of the security guards was sitting at the monitor, who I felt very comfortable because he's one who has been there for a long time, familiar with the school, familiar with the... So that incident was well attended, well received, and well handled. The next incident, when there was another issue where they said someone was going to bring a gun the next day, you know, the kids now are not being made aware. The parents are not being made aware. They're being aware by Mr. Maletti made a phone call and said, "We are aware of a situation and it's all good." As a parent, that's not all good. You know, it was very vague, it was very alarming, and now the kids have gone up are in that school and they're saying somebody's got a gun, because now there's 15 cops outside doing what they're supposed to do, doing what they're charged to do. But as a parent, it was a very uneasy situation. Now, I've constantly been up at that high school on a regular basis, and it's chaos normally in the morning time. They're trying to get where they need to be. You could hear a pin drop when I walked in that school. And it wasn't so much about the control, it was because those kids were in fear. And what they're going on is what somebody else, information that people are sharing, as opposed to them saying, this is what happened, parents beware. Parents are calling me and it's like, well, what happened this time? I thought the thing was something from Mexico. It's two totally different instances. I'm just saying our communication has got to be better. We have got to make sure that when we are responding to these incidents, that there is some way that the children are made aware that, you know, not just through their parents, because their parents don't even know themselves. And about the incident today, when there was the walkout, what the Board of Ed charged and what they did was a good thing. But my son didn't even know that that was going on. He was not aware that that was, I'm bringing it to his attention because I'm made aware. But I don't know if that was the appropriate thing. To me, for those children, and particularly those high school students, you know, they should have been given a voice. I don't think they were given a voice. This is something that they are fearing. This is something that is happening to them. This is something that is happening to all of us. And I don't think the kids had a buy-in in a response to how they should respond to this. You know, the walkout, you know, and it's on television, and we're following the news, and my son in particular was made aware because of who I am and because of what I do and because of my advocacy. But there are so many other students who may not have had that opportunity and are still in fear. And We take it for granted that this is not our community, that things like this don't happen in our community. That's not historic, that we are subjected to mass shootings in our community, this community. It could be a cultural thing or not, but we're not really normalized that this happens. It shouldn't be that way anyway, but for our community, it's never been a situation. Now, they said that they do these drills. I don't know of a drill that has happened. I mean, I asked my son about that in particular. They said every 3 months or something like that, or 3 times a year. 3 times a year. I'm prayerfully that is happening at the high school. In the middle school, we don't want to make the kids so, fearful of it, but we have to make them aware. Awareness is the only way that we're going to fix this issue. I'm sorry I didn't have a question, but I really needed to share this because, sitting there, I just cannot allow to continue the things to remain status quo as if it is all the way it should be, when it really isn't. We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of things that need to be, and in this particular instance, it revolves our children and their safety. We have to make sure that they are safe. We have a tremendous amount of resources. Make sure that the resources are being utilized appropriately. Make sure that we take charge. We have to take charge. So I think that's all I really want. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. And I said it before that I have 2 children in high school. I have a Bloomfield High student and I have a Metropolitan Learning Center student. And the last incident at Bloomfield High, when I dropped off my son, I saw the police cars. But I'm not just going to leave him there. So I went to one of the officers my question was, do I need to take him home? That was my question. And the police officer then explained to me what had happened. And that he was going to be all right. He said, I'll make sure he's going to be safe by myself. I said, it's all right. I'm going to leave him here with you, and I'm going to go to work. But when the situation, and I'm just speaking to your point about communication. So when the situation happened at MLC, we received a phone call, we received an email, I got a personal phone call that something had happened, that the police was contacted, that investigation was done, and that everything was okay. When MLC has a lockdown, I get an email and I get a phone call that a drill happened. And I think it's just for us to be comfortable with what's going on. So for you to say that communication is a problem, as a parent with 2 children in 2 different schools, I can attest to that.
I don't really want to say it's a problem.
Well, it is a problem. Yeah. It is a problem, and why I say that...
Because I think what they're doing is trying to proceed with caution, because they have to be very mindful of, like the chief said, about, juveniles and, exposing information. But for me, it was like, parents who called me was like, what is going on now? I was aware, but what is going on now? We thought that incident was done, handled, so it is, the communication has to be different.
Well, it becomes a problem because of this, right? Because everything that we know it at least 3 hours after the kids know.
Right.
Because they're on here, social media has, sparked everything. So we're in our world of comfort and safety, but the children are being fearful because when one person gets the story, you know how we do. It's like the telephone game. We add, we subtract, we multiply, we divide from it, and that's what's ramping up all this concern. And probably there should be some concern, but it helps us as parents to be able to, one, make sure that we're in our right minds about a situation, and then we can also help the student. If we know what's going on, we can explain to the student what's going on. So probably the communication, as soon as the school becomes aware, I think the parents should become aware as well. I mean, after you do your due diligence. I think that communication can probably be a little bit better. Ms. Pat, because I see you see.
I agree. I agree that the communication definitely needs to involve the parent a little bit more, and in the vagueness, I think it was. That's what I think. It was just so vague, and again, people weren't even really aware that there were two separate incidents that happened, and there really were, and the kids are the ones who went in the panic zone because now they thought it was a resolve, and now it's another issue, and there's more cops than the first resolve. There are more cops up there. And then my son said, "Mom, I got a text in school that said a kid has a gun here." I'm like, "What kid has a gun? What is going on?" That's how they do, because somebody said it, and then the cops were everywhere, and they really didn't know. They're petrified. I'm worried about, I don't care, the parents, I'm worried about my kids, and I don't mean my son. I'm worried about all of these kids when I'm here, when I stand before you, when I'm about these children and getting them to the next place, and I don't care what anybody has to say about me. My whole advocacy is for the children of this district and the children of this world, making sure that they are safe and that they get what it is that they need in order to be productive citizens, whether it's in Bloomfield or wherever they choose to live. And I want them to live.
Yes.
I want them to live.
Yes.
I think that's it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilman McCary, did you have something?
I don't have a question for that, but I would like, through you, Madam Mayor, if we as a council, the truancy officers said that they are in state statute with the report, if we could get a copy of that report to ensure, so we know what they're doing and the dates, because it's public information, the dates that they've done their drills. Could we get a copy of that report? The safety report that you have to submit to the state?
That'll go through Mr. Guzman's office.
Okay, so.
Okay, if that's okay for us to get that through email? Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just
one more question, Mr. Collins, is going to be for you.
Mr. Collins, it's just a quick question, because I took some notes down. You said that you monitor the cameras in the schools from, so all the schools within Bloomfield?
No.
I know all the schools have cameras.
No, just my school.
Oh, just your school?
Just my school.
Okay. Okay, that's good. When you said monitor, I thought it was a central location
just
somewhere.
within my building.
Okay, got you. Thanks for clarifying that. Thank you.
Any other questions? So thank you for coming out. Thank you to the police department. Thank you to the Board of Ed. Thank you to the board members, the school board members. Thank you to MLC. Thank you for coming out. It is a different world, as you said. School, you could just walk in, knock on the doors and say hi to the teachers, or go to the different classrooms where kids used to be. It's a different world. Now you have to be buzzed in, or you have to call and make an appointment to come in, and all the schools that I know have cameras and monitors all around. But the good thing is, here in Bloomfield, right, we're taking precaution. As sad as that might be, some of the freedom is gone, but we're taking precaution. And as Pat Davis said, we want all our children to live. And I think that has to be priority over everything else that we do. So I thank you, everyone that's here. Thank you for putting the time in, the training, the consciousness, the thought. Thank you for that. I'm going to give the council's members, because Councilman Clary's down there shaking his head. I'm going to give the councilors just 2 minutes of closing. But really, thank you. Thank you for this. And I'm going to just say my little piece, that if we hear of anything, if you hear anyone making any kind of remark, the way the world is, we can't play. We can't say they might just be joking. We can't say, oh, they're out of their minds. We can't say it'll never happen here. The important thing is, if you hear something or see something, please find someone that you can talk to, someone that you trust, and let them know, so that they can do the research to make sure that, it's not something or that it is something, and we all need to be cautious about. It's time that our children really do get to live. They go to school, they should be able to come home. They go to school, they should be able to be safe. So whatever it is that you can do, reach out to your state legislators, reach out to anybody that you can. Let them know we've got to do some things differently. Not another mass shooting, and then we're going to say again we have to do something differently. But this time, let this be the last time. The time for action. Councilor McCleary.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and again, I echo your comments. I thank the police department, the staff from the Board of Ed, Mr. Collins from MLC. This was a very important conversation. I'm happy that we had it recorded so the citizens of Bloomfield are informed of what the police department is doing, what the Board of Ed is doing, their partnership, and I thank everyone out there for paying attention and being involved in this process. Thank you.
Councilor Ball?
I will echo that, and the only thing I think that organizing this kind of event is one of the things we're really trying to do to get these messages and this kind of interaction out in the community so that we can all know what's going on and people can be aware of it. And the one thing I would say is make this information available and get input from the community so that everything that we do, people are aware of. We heard Ms. Davis very, very impassioned about being aware and communication, and I think that's extremely important. Thank you.
Councilman?
This is a very enlightening discussion. I'm one of the few on the council that doesn't have kids in the school, not since the 1990s when kids in high school, and the world has changed dramatically. I'm glad that we have this discussion. I hope the discussion continues, and so that we as a community can be aware and take action when needed. And part of it is, from what I heard from the comment that Councilman Goff made, we cannot continue to make schools be more like a penal institution. Maybe we need to have activities within the school that make kids have fun again. We need to go the other direction at some points, but I don't mean to take attention away from the issue at hand. I really think that the discussion as we've started it, and hopefully will continue amongst the players here, who are the drivers of the solution. I'm just thrilled that you all came out, and I hope that the citizens at home had a chance to see this, absorb it, and participate in the next discussion. Thank you.
Well, I just have to say, as a parent, once again, with two kids in the school, I think the school does a really good job of bringing parents into the schools. I mean, it's not that you're locked out, but I think you need safety, and you cannot have the schools open in the time we live in now for anyone to walk in. It's kind of sad when I have my 7-year-old daughter is talking to me about her drills that she's doing in school, and she has to hide underneath a desk and be quiet. It's sad, but it's needed. So, I'm happy that you guys are taking all the steps to make sure our kids are safe. I just want you to continue to work together in the collaboration with parents so they could also be aware, they could also talk to their kids at home and what's going on in the schools. And we just have to keep making sure that we train, because if you look at every single place this has occurred, the one theme is this was a safe place. It was safe. So I know we have a small town here. It doesn't mean that we're immune to anything happening here. So we have to keep taking those drills. Thank you very much for coming out, and thanks for this discussion. Have a good night.
Thank you.